The escalation happened faster than I anticipated, too fast. That should have been my first warning. This wasn't just a case of overzealous neighborhood management or some cranky old man on a power trip trying to feel important. No, this was something else entirely. Richard Harrison wasn't just flexing HOA rules to feel big in his small pond, he was planning something. Something deliberate. And Elena and I were about to stumble headfirst into the heart of it. Looking back, the signs had always been there, scattered like puzzle pieces just waiting to be connected. You just had to know how to see them. Unfortunately for Richard, I'd spent 2 decades of my life trained to do exactly that. I knew how to watch for patterns, how to assess threats, and how to read a battlefield, even if that battlefield was now a neatly landscaped cul-de-sac lined with SUVs and garden gnomes. The mistake Richard made was assuming I'd gone soft. That I'd let myself get too comfortable with flower beds, lawn fertilizer, and weekly trash pickups. But comfort is a choice. And I'd never chosen to forget who I was, or what I was still capable of. It all started unraveling the night Elena came into the kitchen holding a stack of printed documents. Her usual calm demeanor had been replaced with something colder, clinical, focused. She set them down on the table with a quiet authority that demanded my attention. "David," she said, her voice low and steady, "this isn't random. He's planning something. Something specific. And he's waiting for the right moment to do it." I stared down at the paperwork, flipping through the pages. Surveillance photos. Notes on our comings and goings. Even time-stamped records of when we turned our lights off at night. It was too detailed. Too calculated. And the deeper I went into those pages, the clearer it became, Richard wasn't acting alone. Elena, my wife of 18 years, the woman who could transform bricks and blueprints into art, had turned into a full-blown investigator without ever saying a word about it. She'd traced the strange surveillance camera that had been installed on a nearby utility pole, the one pointed directly at our house. When she called the utility company, they had no record of any recent installations. City Hall had no permits filed for the equipment. There was no official explanation for why a high-definition camera had appeared overnight, quietly humming away while recording our every move. So she did what any good architect would do, she followed the structure. Literally. She traced the cable leading from the camera down the pole, along the fence line, through the grass behind our neighbor's property, and into a small shed in the backyard of none other than Carol Jenkins, Richard's self-appointed enforcer. Inside, buried beneath boxes of old decorations and gardening supplies, she found a small, encrypted recording device humming away, its lights blinking red like something out of a spy thriller. Elena didn't touch it, she just took pictures. Lots of them. As she relayed the story to me across the kitchen table, I could feel the slow boil of rage rising in my chest. Not because we were being watched, I'd dealt with far worse during my years overseas. But because they'd involved her. They had targeted my wife. Crossed into our life, our sanctuary. And that wasn't something I could forgive. Not now. Not ever. But that wasn't the most disturbing part. Elena had also discovered that Richard had intimate knowledge of our daily routines. He knew my work schedule, down to the minute. He knew which days I was home and which days I was at the office consulting. He knew when Elena had client calls. He even knew the date of her upcoming trip to a design conference 2 states away, something we'd barely mentioned out loud. Which meant one thing, he had access to our private information. Possibly through digital channels. Our email? Our shared calendars? Either way, it wasn't just nosy, it was criminal. "This isn't about the HA anymore," Elena said, her eyes locked on mine. "This is about control. He's watching us for a reason, and I think it's personal." I nodded slowly, still processing everything she'd uncovered. The violation notices. The unmarked surveillance. The way Carol always seemed to be watching from across the street, camera in hand, not even pretending to hide it anymore. It was all too methodical. Too organized. And Richard's unnerving behavior, the way he studied me during every interaction, like he was trying to place a face he'd seen in a past life, it finally made sense. He recognized me. Or at least, he recognized something about me. Maybe the way I moved. The way I scanned a room. The faded tattoo on my arm that Carol had clearly seen and reported. The mark that only someone with certain clearances would ever understand. That trident meant something to him. And now I knew, this wasn't a coincidence. Richard wasn't just another neighborhood tyrant. He had a history too. One that, for some reason, had now collided with mine. He thought I wouldn't fight back. That I'd let this go. He was wrong. Retirement didn't mean I forgot how to handle a threat. It just meant I learned how to wait for the right time. And that time was coming. Fast. In 20 years of service, I'd seen evil in many forms, desperate, calculated, political, ideological. But nothing ever made my blood run cold the way the truth about Richard Harrison did. The days that followed the home invasion weren't filled with rest or repair. They were consumed by cold, methodical investigation. I didn't sleep much. Neither did Elena. Not because we weren't tired, but because closing our eyes meant seeing it all again. The shattered pottery, the gutted garden, the look on her face as they cornered her like prey in her own home. That image had burned itself into the back of my mind, and it wouldn't let go. After the police took Max, Jake, and Carol into custody, things should have settled. But they didn't. Not really. Carol was released on bail the same night, and the men were held only temporarily before lack of sufficient evidence and conflicting reports muddied the waters enough to delay any meaningful charges. The official story was that it had all been a misunderstood HOA enforcement action gone slightly off the rails. The media didn't care. The police didn't care. But I did. Elena's hands shook when she tried to work on her laptop, and she refused to go outside without me. The garden, the place she'd poured her soul into, was now a field of broken glass and ripped roots. And every time she looked at it, something behind her eyes seemed to dim a little more. That was when I realized something fundamental had shifted. This wasn't about violations or neighborhood harmony. This was psychological warfare, designed, deployed, and executed with intention. I went through every shred of surveillance I had, reviewed footage frame by frame, studied body language, voice tones, entry angles. I didn't just want revenge. I wanted to understand. Because Richard hadn't just sent a couple of meatheads to scare us. He'd timed it down to the minute. He knew I'd be gone. Knew Elena would be alone. That meant he wasn't just watching. He had intel. Real, live intel. The kind that doesn't come from a nosy neighbor or a passing car. Someone had been feeding him high-level information. My schedules, our habits, our vulnerabilities. And that's what brought me back to my old mindset, the one I'd buried beneath mulch and rosebushes. I was no longer reacting. I was operating. Elena joined me in this quiet war. She wasn't a fighter in the conventional sense, but her resolve was diamond hard. She took to the research like she was preparing for a court case. Property records, business filings, archived social media posts. Every evening, she'd hand me a stack of printed findings like we were briefing for an op. And one night, she handed me a name. One I recognized instantly. David, she said, her voice brittle. I think I found out who that man in the suit was, the one who gave Richard that folder. I looked at the paper. The man's name was Robert Delaney, a former private intelligence contractor who had gone off-grid after a botched operation in Eastern Europe 8 years ago. He wasn't supposed to be in the country. His company had folded under congressional investigation for human rights violations. But there he was, clear as day, in a high-resolution photo, shaking hands with Richard in the parking lot of a local diner. That folder likely contained classified information. About me. And that was the moment it clicked. Richard Harrison wasn't just a petty tyrant with an overinflated ego. He was someone I had known before. In another life. I dug through my own classified past, the files I still had, the names I remembered. And there it was. Operation Iron Harbor. A black site wrecking team composed of 8 men. One of them had washed out halfway through the op due to psychological instability and command conflicts. That man's name? Harrison, Richard T. dishonorably discharged. Buried and forgotten. Until now. He'd remembered me. That's what the looks were. That intense stare. He was trying to place me. Trying to reconcile the quiet man mowing his lawn with the ghost from his past who once testified against him in a closed-door tribunal. I hadn't seen him in 2 decades. But he'd never forgotten me. And now he wanted payback. He hadn't just chosen our house at random. He'd engineered the entire situation. From the moment he weaseled his way into the HOA president role, this had been the plan. Re-establish control. Use the HOA's power as legal cover. Weaponize bylaws as surveillance tools. And when that didn't shake me, send in thugs. Hurt the people I loved. I stared at Elena across the table, the two of us surrounded by piles of paper, shattered photos, and security footage. He's not just trying to drive us out, I said. He's trying to break me. She nodded slowly. Why? Because I broke him first, I said. A long time ago. In a place no one talks about. Her eyes widened, but she didn't ask for details. She just whispered, so what do we do now? I leaned back in my chair and exhaled. The man she married was about to disappear for a while. In his place, someone colder was returning. Someone who knew exactly how to end a threat like this, and who wouldn't stop until it was over. "We fight," I said. "And this time, we end it. Completely." And so began the final phase. The reckoning. The moment where Richard Harrison would finally learn the lesson he should have remembered from our last encounter. Never come after a man with nothing left to lose. And never, ever touch his family. Underscore 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 underscore. Some sleeping dog should never be awakened, and Richard Harrison was about to learn that the hard way. The full picture of Richard's past wasn't easy to uncover. Elena and I spent days piecing together the fragments, combing through military archives, cross-referencing service records, and digging into sealed files using contacts I'd hoped I'd never need to call again. Her research instincts, sharpened by years of architectural forensics and meticulous design audits, merged seamlessly with my experience in military intelligence. The result was a chilling, undeniable truth. Richard's military career hadn't just ended badly. It had imploded. He had indeed served, as I suspected, but not honorably. His file was layered in redactions and sealed memos, some of which were only accessible through quiet favors owed to me from men in dusty government offices. What we uncovered painted a clear but disturbing picture. A court-martial proceeding. Accusations of conduct unbecoming an officer. Multiple entries flagged with phrases like breach of operational protocol, failure to protect unit integrity, and the most damning of all, compromise of classified intelligence. The deeper we went, the more the timeline aligned with something I remembered all too well, Operation Iron Harbor. A joint force Black Ops mission that had gone off the rails in spectacular, bloody fashion. We'd always suspected there had been a leak, someone feeding intel to hostile forces. 2 men died because of it. Half the unit was injured. And the entire operation was scrubbed from the books. Until now. Elena laid the printed reports out on the kitchen table one night, her face pale and unreadable. The documents spoke for themselves. I didn't need to read them again, I'd lived that history. She looked at me quietly, her voice barely more than a whisper. "David, this isn't a coincidence, is it? He knows exactly who you are." I nodded once, the weight of it settling into my chest like a stone. He always did. And then came the final puzzle piece, dropped by accident, in the form of a visit from Mr. Calhoun, our elderly neighbor. A good man. The kind who remembered birthdays, watered his plants every morning at the same time, and baked banana bread for new residents. He'd heard about the break-in and came by to check on Elena. During our talk, he said something that turned my blood to ice. "You know," he said between sips of coffee, "Richard mentioned something odd back when he first moved in. Said he was glad to have a fresh start, but joked that he was finally going to settle an old score with some special forces guy who ruined his career." He chuckled, then added, "Didn't think much of it at the time. Just figured it was old war talk." But now, his voice trailed off. Elena and I locked eyes. That was it. The motive. The obsession. Richard hadn't stumbled into our lives by accident. He had followed me here, waited, watched, and found the moment he thought I was most vulnerable. Retired. Married. Distracted. But he'd miscalculated. Because the one thing more dangerous than a trained soldier, is one with something to protect. The final nail in Richard's coffin came from the most unexpected source, Carol. Or rather, Carol's greed and paranoia. One of our other neighbors, fed up with her constant stalking and meddling, approached Elena quietly and handed her a flash drive. "I think you'll want to see this," she said. "Carol's been bragging about her documentation project." Whatever that means. What it meant was worse than we imagined. The drive contained hundreds of high-res photos, of me, of our home, of Elena. There were time-stamped notes detailing my every movement, some of them so specific I knew she had access to our calendars. Then came the real bombshell, a recorded audio file of Carol and Richard. Elena and I sat in stunned silence as we listened. "I've been tracking David Vulture Peterson for years," Richard said. "He thought he erased me back then, but I survived. And now, I'm going to burn down everything he built, starting with that picture-perfect little wife of his." Hearing my old call sign spoken aloud, it was like being punched in the gut. I hadn't heard Vulture in over a decade. It was a name I'd buried, along with the life that came with it. But now, it was back. And this time, it wasn't just a ghost from the past. It was a threat to my present. I made my decision that night. No more hiding. No more defense. It was time to end this, with witnesses, with evidence, and with the kind of clarity no one could deny. The monthly HOA board meeting was scheduled for Thursday. I knew Richard would be there, as smug and controlling as ever, peddling his latest neighborhood safety initiatives. Elena wanted to join me, but I asked her to stay home, for her own safety, and because I didn't want her anywhere near the fallout. This confrontation wouldn't just be public, it would be explosive. For 2 days, I prepared. I gathered every piece of documentation, every image, every recording. I organized it into a tight, irrefutable case. I even borrowed a projector from Elena's firm so no one could claim ignorance. And I chose my wardrobe carefully, a collared shirt with sleeves that could be rolled up when the moment came. The confrontation wouldn't be a fight, but it would be war. Richard had built his authority on fear and lies. I was about to dismantle it with truth and reputation. When I was done, no one in that room would ever see him, or me, the same way again. And the man who once called himself my commander would finally come face to face with the man who ended his career, and was about to end his last illusion of power. The truth about our past was worse than I'd imagined. And over the next 48 hours, that truth would turn a quiet suburban neighborhood into a battlefield. 15 years ago, Richard Harrison had been my commanding officer during a covert op in Afghanistan. What should have been routine intel gathering turned into a bloodbath. Our patrol routes had been sold to Taliban forces for $50,000 cash. It was an ambush, perfectly timed, surgically executed. 2 of my brothers-in-arms died. 3 more, including me, were wounded and stranded for 18 hours in enemy territory. I'd suspected betrayal then, but proving it took months of digging, cross-referencing patrol data, encrypted comms, and tracing suspicious wire transfers. Eventually, I built the case that ended Richard's military career. Elena, my wife, read through the declassified court-martial transcripts with silent horror. "David," she whispered, her voice shaking, "he didn't just betray the mission. He betrayed you. Personally." She was right. Richard's vendetta had always been about more than exposure, it was about revenge. His final court testimony had said it all: "I'll find David Peterson someday. I'll make him pay for destroying my career. He thinks he's a hero, but I'll show him what real consequences look like." Now, all these years later, he was making good on that promise. After I confronted him at the HOA meeting, Richard acted fast. He lawyered up with a slimeball who specialized in smearing veterans. Within hours, rumors spread that I had PTSD and had threatened Richard with violence. A restraining order followed, built on lies and paranoia. It was a smart move, playing the unstable vet card. But Richard underestimated the people in this neighborhood. They'd already seen enough of his true nature. Then came the escalation. On Saturday night, Richard made his move. He hired 6 professionals, ex-military types with criminal records, to clean up the situation permanently. But I'd been watching him. Monitoring his encrypted comms with equipment that wasn't exactly legal, but absolutely necessary. I knew the hit was coming. That afternoon, I turned our home into a fortress. Elena wanted to call the police, but I told her the truth: by the time they arrived, it would be too late. Instead, I walked her through the hidden safe room in our basement. Gave her a crash course in self-defense. Prayed she'd never need to use it. "This is insane," she said, watching me check the power backups and seal the windows. "We're talking about people trying to kill us." "Elena," I replied, "I'm going to keep you safe. Whatever it takes." They came at 2 a.m., precise, silent, and well-equipped. Power was cut, comms jammed, landline down. 6 men with military training surrounded the house. Under normal circumstances, we'd have been done for. But I hadn't survived Afghanistan by being normal. I'd been awake, watching, waiting. The battle was fast and brutal. I used everything I had: tripwires strung between trees, fire extinguishers as both cover and weapons, landscaping as concealment. One attacker fell into a wire trap and shattered his collarbone. Another was blinded by pressurized chemical foam. As panic set in, they realized they weren't hunting prey, they were being hunted. The fight spilled into the house. I took a knife wound to the shoulder during the final takedown, but by the end of it, all 6 men were down, zip-tied, disarmed, and groaning on the floor. Elena emerged from the safe room, pale but steady, as I patched my wound with a kitchen towel. She looked around at the wreckage and unconscious bodies. "David," she said quietly, "who were you, before you became my husband?" I gave her the truth she deserved. While we waited for the sirens, she documented everything: Photos, weapons, IDs, license plates. She moved with calm precision, no longer just a victim. She was a warrior now, shaped by fire. Elena, I said, when this ends, when Richard is behind bars, there are things you need to know. Things I should have told you long ago. She met my eyes without flinching. I don't care who you were, David. I care about who you are now. And right now? You're the man who saved our lives. And in that moment, I knew this war wasn't over. But at least, I wasn't fighting it alone. Was David's response justified, or did he cross a line? That's the question I want you to sit with. Drop your thoughts in the comments, because sometimes justice doesn't come from a courtroom. Sometimes, it rises from the ashes of a broken community, forged through truth, resilience, and the courage of ordinary people who refuse to back down. The fallout from Richard Harrison's attempted murder plot shook our neighborhood to its core and revealed the truth about who really protects a community. It's not titles, it's not uniforms, and it's certainly not fear. It's integrity. It's sacrifice. It's standing up when it would be easier to walk away. Elena and I never asked to be in this fight. We just wanted to live peacefully, tend our garden, and build a life together after years of chaos and war. But when Richard tried to destroy that, when he weaponized our neighborhood, our HOA, and even his own military past against us, we had no choice but to push back. What started as a feud over property lines and HOA violations spiraled into a violent conspiracy that included harassment, property destruction, and ultimately a plan to end my life. But Richard made one critical mistake: he underestimated us. He thought he was dealing with a quiet couple who would go down without a fight. What he didn't know was that he'd picked a fight with a Navy SEAL and a woman who had more leadership in her pinky finger than he'd shown in his entire career. The investigation moved fast. Thanks to the overwhelming evidence Elena and I gathered, and the bravery of others who came forward, the authorities had everything they needed. The 6 criminals Richard hired to carry out his plan? They flipped faster than anyone expected. Faced with serious federal charges, they had no interest in protecting a man like Richard. Their statements painted a chilling picture of just how far Richard had gone to settle personal vendettas. And then came the community meeting, the turning point. What happened inside the packed room changed everything. Our neighbors came together not in fear, but in strength. People we thought were indifferent stood up and spoke truth. The elderly man who had warned us early on broke down in front of everyone, his voice shaking as he described what Richard's rule had done to our home. Carol Jenkins, once Richard's most loyal supporter, apologized in front of the entire town. Her tears were real. Her regret was raw. And her confession shattered any illusions that Richard's actions were defensible. When Richard tried to spin the story in his favor, blaming me, bringing up my military service as some sort of disqualifier for civilian life, the crowd turned. One word, shouted from the back of the room, cut through the noise like a blade: traitor. And suddenly, he wasn't a respected former soldier anymore. He was a bully exposed, a liar unmasked, a man stripped of his false authority. Elena was unanimously elected as the new HOA president that night. She didn't ask for it. But everyone saw what I already knew, that she was a natural leader. Her first order of business? Rebuilding everything Richard had tried to destroy. She restructured the HOA, implemented transparency and accountability, and created a new vision, one built not on fear, but on fairness. It wasn't just about rules anymore, it was about rights. Real leadership had finally come to Willowbrook. Richard's sentencing was swift and decisive. Federal prison. At least 15 years, likely more. His assets? Frozen to pay for restitution. That money went to the people he harmed, us included, and helped repair the emotional and physical damage he caused. But more than that, his downfall sent a message: if you abuse power, no matter how small your kingdom, justice will find you. You are not untouchable. 6 months later, our house stood stronger than ever. Elena's designs, my security expertise, it was more than a rebuild. It was a statement. Our garden bloomed again, this time with plants chosen for their symbolism: strength, growth, renewal. The neighborhood transformed too. Under Elena's leadership, property values rose, and for the first time in years, people actually smiled at community meetings. They came together not to argue, but to connect. To celebrate. Even Carol Jenkins found a second chance. She worked alongside Elena, fulfilling her community service but doing far more than required. She rebuilt trust, one flower bed, one clean sidewalk, one honest conversation at a time. On a warm evening, standing in that garden, Elena handed me a cup of coffee. We looked out at what we had built, not just a home, but a better world in miniature. A safer one. A just one. I looked into the camera and spoke the words I'd been holding back until now. Here's what I've learned, I said. Never underestimate your quiet neighbor. Never mistake peace for weakness. And if you threaten a Navy SEAL's wife, you better be prepared for war, because we might look ordinary, but we're anything but helpless. Elena laughed at that. Still telling war stories? She asked. No, I said. Just sharing some life lessons. Because this isn't just a story about revenge or justice. It's a story about resilience. About how heroes come in all shapes and sizes. About how communities can rebuild stronger after trauma. And about how even the quietest among us may be hiding skills, strength, and courage you'd never imagine. So here's my final question to you. What would you do if someone tried to destroy your peace? What secrets might your neighbors be hiding? And what happens when ordinary people are pushed too far? Let me know what you think in the comments. And if this story fired you up, don't forget to subscribe to QA Stories, where the quietest voices sometimes tell the loudest truths. The end. My dad never told me any of this. Not once. And the more I thought about it, the stranger it seemed. I stood there in my kitchen, surrounded by dusty old documents that smelled like time itself, ink faded, edges yellowed, the kind of paper you knew had lived through generations. My hands trembled slightly, either from the weight of the discovery or from the decades of family history pressing in on me all at once. Across from me, Maria sat with a look on her face that told me this wasn't just some neighborhood disagreement anymore. This was something deeper, something rooted in land, legacy, and long-forgotten truth. I couldn't stop thinking about my father. He was a private man, sure. Not one to talk much about his past or the family he'd come from. Growing up, I never questioned that. Like a lot of kids, I assumed whatever was left unsaid didn't matter. We moved a lot, lived modestly. There was never any talk of inherited land or family property. No stories about old deeds or generational ownership. Just weekend trips to random fishing spots, usually upstate, with a worn tackle box and thermos full of coffee. I remember those trips fondly, quiet mornings, mist rising off the lake, my father teaching me to cast and telling little stories to pass the time. But now, one memory from those days came back with sharp clarity, hitting me like a hook to the chest. I must have been 8 or 9. We were sitting on the edge of some rickety dock on a lake far from here, can't even remember the name of it. My dad was tying a lure onto my line when he paused, gazed out over the water, and said something I'd never really paid attention to until now. You know, my father used to own a lake. Not this one, down south. Before things went bad. I remember laughing, thinking it sounded like one of those dad tales meant to sound impressive. I pictured a cartoon version of my grandfather, rich and important, surveying his lake from some fancy lodge with a cigar in one hand. At the time, I just assumed it was exaggeration. Kids always think their parents are making stuff up to sound bigger than life. But what if it wasn't a story? What if my grandfather really did own a lake? What if he didn't just own a house on the lake, or access rights, but the lake itself? And what if, somehow, that ownership was never properly transferred or recorded in the modern system? Or worse, what if someone had tried to bury that truth over the years? I looked back down at the papers laid out across the table. Maria was already sorting them into piles with the precision of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. The deed was the centerpiece, dated 1948, signed by Manuel Rodriguez, my grandfather. There was a county seal on it, pressed in with that kind of official heft that screams authenticity. The language was old-fashioned, the kind of legal phrasing you had to read 3 times just to understand, but Maria guided me through it like a seasoned interpreter. And the more she explained, the more stunned I became. This doesn't say you have lake access, she said, tapping her finger on a line halfway down the page. It says you own the body of water entirely, shoreline to center, including docking rights and mineral access. The HOA has absolutely no authority here. None. And if Miranda's been enforcing rules on this lake, she's doing so on property that doesn't legally belong to the community. I had to sit down. The room spun for a second, not from the revelation itself, but from the sheer implications. For years, I'd lived here under the assumption that I was just another homeowner with a nice spot by the water. I thought I'd paid for serenity, not sovereignty. And all this time, my dock wasn't just a part of my house, it was sitting on top of something much bigger. Something I hadn't even known I possessed. Why didn't my father ever tell me? That question kept echoing in my head. Maybe he didn't know. Maybe his father, Manuel, had lost the documents or believed the ownership was irrelevant after a sale or local restructuring. Maybe the family just let it go during tough times and assumed it was all part of the past. Or maybe, just maybe, someone had made it easier to forget. I glanced over at Maria. She was quiet now, her eyes scanning one of the older ledgers from the box. Her brow furrowed in that way people do when they find something interesting but potentially troubling. I could tell we were only scratching the surface. This wasn't just about a boat anymore. It wasn't about HOA violations or smug women with clipboards pretending they ruled the lake. This was about my grandfather's legacy. About something he'd left behind, not just for his son, who never spoke of it, but for me. And suddenly, Earl's strange comment from 2 years ago came rushing back. Sometimes the past has ways of protecting the future. He hadn't been talking about tax records or old receipts. He'd been talking about this. And now, it was up to me to figure out what to do with it. By Thursday morning, I had almost let myself believe things might finally be settling down. I'd spent Wednesday replying to neighbors who stopped by, curious about the deed, eager to hear more, some offering baked goods as if they'd crossed party lines in a quiet civil war and wanted to make peace. Maria and I had planned to go back to the county records office later in the week, just to follow up on filing the updated ownership clarification. I was starting to feel like maybe this bizarre little storm had passed. Then, right around 8:30 a.m., while I was sitting on the back porch with a fresh cup of coffee, watching the mist burn off the lake, I heard the soft thud of the mail drop. It didn't register right away. Just routine. But when I walked over and picked up the single, crisp envelope lying on the mat, something about it made me pause. It was oversized. Cream-colored, heavier than usual. Certified. My name typed in precise block letters, no return address, just a stamped insignia on the back flap that looked vaguely legal, but also strangely theatrical, like someone playing lawyer dress-up. I sat back down, coffee forgotten on the porch rail, and just held the envelope for a while. 5 full minutes, easy. It had a weight to it, not just in ounces, but in presence. That same awful pressure you feel in a courtroom before the verdict. Bad news has gravity. This envelope had mass. When I finally opened it, I didn't unfold the pages immediately. I just stared at the first sentence, printed in bold, red ink across the top of the page like a headline from a tabloid masquerading as law. Notice of pending legal action and community censure. HOA case number 0425 MSR. My stomach dropped. The letter was 4 pages long, front and back, written in dense legalese that tried very hard to sound intimidating. Miranda, now apparently referring to herself as acting executive director pro tempore of the HOA, was attempting to file an official complaint not just against my boat, but against me personally for willful non-compliance, misrepresentation of property claims, and endangering community unity through misinformation and provocation. I had to read that line twice to be sure I wasn't hallucinating. The accusations were absurd, completely untethered from reality, but that didn't make them any less enraging. Miranda had gone full scorched earth. She wasn't just trying to enforce HOA rules anymore. She was trying to turn the community against me. According to her letter, she was initiating a motion for formal censure, which she described as a necessary disciplinary action to preserve community integrity in the face of rogue behavior. She accused me of undermining democratic processes and violating spirit-based community standards, whatever that meant. She included attachments, out-of-context meeting minutes, blurry photos of my boat again, and cherry-picked bylaws with underlined sections that had nothing to do with private property. Her legal citations weren't from our county, they were from a case in Vermont. Vermont. I live in Texas. But clearly, Miranda thought she could bluff her way into control, the same way she'd intimidated others for years. This time, though, she was swinging blindly. The letter concluded with a thinly veiled threat: if I did not respond in writing within 72 hours to accept voluntary corrective action, the HOA would be forced to escalate this matter through formal arbitration and legal channels, including public disclosure of misconduct. I actually laughed out loud at that part. Misconduct? For sitting in a fishing boat on my own lake? Still, the audacity of it took my breath away. This wasn't some harmless HOA notice anymore. This was personal. Miranda had been publicly humiliated at the meeting, and now she was trying to re-establish dominance by drowning me in paperwork and legal theater. It wasn't about rules, or boats, or property values anymore, it was about control. And I was standing in her way. I called Maria. She picked up on the second ring. "Let me guess," she said before I could even say hello. A letter arrived. I read her a few of the highlights, and by the end, she was laughing so hard I thought she might drop the phone. She used spirit-based community standards? Is she forming a cult now? I don't know, I muttered, rubbing my temples. But I think she's trying to scare me into backing down. Well, it's not going to work, Maria said firmly. You've got the law. She's got a clipboard and an ego problem. She was right, of course. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Miranda wasn't going to give up easily. She was wounded, and people like her don't go quietly. They double down. They escalate. And clearly, she was already willing to twist the truth to fit her narrative. I glanced out at the lake again, sunlight glinting off the water like it was daring me to quit. But I wasn't backing down. Not now. Not when the truth was on my side. Not when my grandfather's name was written on deeds that predated this entire neighborhood. Miranda had picked the wrong fight. She thought I was just another homeowner with a rusty boat and no idea how property law worked. But I had something better. I had proof. And come Monday, I was going to use it. I had to read the letter 3 times, and even then, I wasn't entirely sure I had processed it correctly. It wasn't just formal, there was something serious about it. Too serious. The kind of serious that hits you in the chest, makes your stomach turn, and leaves your hands shaking a little even after you've put it down. It was official looking, typed in a dense, intimidating font, stamped with a law firm seal, and heavy with legal jargon that made me feel like I was being sued by a Fortune 500 company rather than a bitter neighborhood HOA president. Miranda had hired her brother-in-law's law firm to represent the HOA and was now demanding that I prove my lake ownership in